Imagine someone claiming to be a demon, watching you from the shadows, waiting for the moment you utter their name 3 times. What would you do if that person appeared without fail every time their name was spoken? In today's tale, we dive into the chilling story of a high school student whose eerie presence blurred the line between myth and madness. His unsettling obsession with adopting certain people brought fear to everyone around him. But was it just a disturbed mind at play? Or was something far more sinister lurking beneath his vacant stare? As the strange and terrifying events unfold, ask yourself, what would you do if you saw someone like this, always watching, always knowing when their name is spoken? Could you handle the fear? Stay tuned for a spine-chilling tale of obsession, mystery, and a haunting disappearance that will leave you questioning, was he really human? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more creepy stories if you dare. The rest of us went silent, nervous about what Patrick would do this time. We watched him stare at us for a few seconds before disappearing over the fence. Johnny began to freak out, accusing us of conspiring with Patrick to scare him. We told him that we had begged him not to say anything. We sat silently before Johnny told us all to go home, clearly shaken by the experience. My most recent experience with Patrick was undoubtedly the scariest and most disturbing. It was the only time I felt like my life was in danger. A few months after the incident at Johnny's house, I was alone one night. My parents rarely left the house back then, so this was unusual. I decided to take advantage of the situation and invite a boy I had been conversing with. He was a bit of a tool, but so were most of the guys I talked to at that age. We were hanging out in my room while it was lightly raining outside. After a while, he said something about Patrick that made me visibly cringe. He became confused, so I explained the situation to him. He laughed and said he would say Patrick's name to scare me. I begged him not to, but he still did it. Only this time, he didn't just say it. He screamed Patrick's name 3 times at the top of his voice. There was no delay this time. I could hear the rain started immediately after he finished yelling. A few seconds later, there was a bolt of lightning. I started freaking out. The guy I was with apologized and said it was probably just a very unlikely coincidence. I cursed him out and dashed to my window to see the storm. I looked down at my driveway and screamed when I noticed a silhouette of a person staring up at my window. It was too dark and stormy to tell, but I was 99.9% certain it was Patrick. I closed the blinds and dashed downstairs to ensure all doors were locked. After locking the back door, I noticed that person again, but this time he was standing motionless in my front yard. I felt a panic attack coming on, and I knew Patrick would find a way into my home. I started screaming, "But I'm adopted," over and over again, hoping it would work. I knew he couldn't have heard me, but my mind was scattered then. The guy I was with dashed down the stairs a few seconds later, picking me up off the kitchen floor in an attempt to console me. I looked out the window again and he was gone. The storm was still hard, but I wouldn't search the property anyway. The next morning, after that guy had left, I went outside to inspect my yard. To my horror, I discovered something sinister in the far corner of my backyard. It was Patrick's hoodie, with some random belongings wrapped inside that I assumed I had lost. My parents had left another day, and I was too scared to call the cops. I figured I'd show my parents what I found after school the next day and let them take it from there. I never had to, though. Patrick failed to appear at school the following day. He did not show up the next day either. We never saw him again and had no idea what happened to him. My parents still live in the same house, which I often think about. I understand this isn't your typical scary story, but I'm unsure where else to vent. A few classmates told me Patrick was hiding and listening in on their conversations, which could explain how he appeared out of nowhere. As I've grown older and reflected on the situation, I believe what makes the most sense is that Patrick was simply a mentally ill stalker who followed me and possibly other girls around, hence the sense of protection when he adopted us. But something about it still doesn't feel right to me. In either case, I sincerely hope I never see him again. This is going to sound strange, but bear with me. When I was in high school, a student told everyone he was a demon. I'm uncomfortable even writing his name for reasons you'll soon understand. I'll call him Patrick, even though his name sounds like something from a Shakespeare play. He was extremely socially awkward and walked around with a vacant expression that made even teachers uncomfortable. He wore the same blank gray hoodie almost every day. I'm not exaggerating. I'm sure he never washed it because he always smelled terrible. He was short and average-looking, but you couldn't tell because he always wore his hood up. He never removed his sunglasses even inside. Teachers eventually stopped asking him because he refused to listen anyway. Now comes the weird stuff. He had no friends and had a weird habit of adopting people. If he liked you, which he could decide at any time, he would approach you and say, "You're adopted," implying that you were a member of his circle or something. Apparently this would keep you safe from him, or so he'd say. He didn't like many people, so only a few were ever adopted. I was one of the few. It was because he had a crush on me. Nobody believed his demon spiel and everyone assumed he was a troubled kid, which he undoubtedly was. Oh, and I should mention that this takes place in Wayne, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. He also adopted Gabby, a girl I once befriended. Patrick had a more obvious crush on her and my friends knew. One day, my friends and I were hanging out on the dugouts behind our high school, killing time and doing whatever. It was me, Gabby, Laura, and Luke. I can't remember how it happened, but the conversation turned to Patrick's crush on Gabby. We were all laughing about it, and Gabby was clearly embarrassed. I am trying to remember it, but Patrick's real name was too clunky, so we'd use a nickname instead. This time, however, I remember Laura using Patrick's real name. The third time she said it, I swear Patrick appeared out of nowhere and jumped on the dugout, holding a baseball bat. It wasn't scary in the traditional sense, but it was one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen up to that point. We quickly stopped talking, concerned that he might have overheard us discussing him. He did not say anything, just stared at us. I gave him a small wave and he nodded in response before returning to the ground and quickly walking away. After we were certain he had left, the four of us laughed, finding humor in how strange the encounter had been. However, I was still slightly disturbed on the inside. The next incident I recall was far more creepy and impossible to laugh about. I was at Laura's house and we were hanging out in her room. Her parents were home. I don't know what we were talking about, but the two of us mentioned Patrick's name 3 times. We heard Laura's front door slam shut less than 10 minutes later. Confounded, we went downstairs to see if our other friends had decided to pull up. Laura was friends with everyone, and her parents were very relaxed, so people came and went to her house unannounced. Laura's mother had beaten us to the door, though. We turned the living room corner and stared in surprise at Patrick, who was simply standing there talking to Laura's mother. She asked what he was doing there, and he literally replied, "I was summoned." Laura's mother exchanged small talk with him before politely asking him to leave, which he did silently. Laura's mother knew Patrick and felt sorry for him, so no more alarms went off. On the other hand, Laura and I were more agitated by the situation. As we walked back up the stairs, we made horrified faces and discussed how creepy it was. A few minutes later, we connected the two events. He appeared when his name was uttered 3 times. I understand how ridiculous this sounds, but we'd both witnessed 2 unexplainable events and were aware of Patrick's history of claiming to be a demon. How else could someone explain what had happened? The following day, we told all of our friends about the incident, and our friend group vowed never to mention his name 3 times in one conversation again. Things were going well for a few months, and I wondered if I had overreacted. That is, until one day when my group of friends gathered at my other friend Johnny's home. We were chilling on his back deck when the conversation returned to Patrick. Johnny refused to believe what we said about Patrick despite our efforts to persuade him. Even after confirming the story with the entire group, he remained skeptical. He jokedly used Patrick's name 3 times in one sentence to demonstrate his disbelief. When nothing happened, he grinned and told us we were idiots for believing something absurd. As annoyed as I was, part of me was relieved that he hadn't arrived. Patrick jumped over Johnny's backyard fence just a few minutes after I spoke. Johnny noticed him first, then paused in mid-sentence. I understand this isn't your typical scary story, but I'm unsure where else to vent. A few classmates told me Patrick was hiding and listening in on their conversations. which could explain how he appeared out of nowhere. As I've grown older and reflected on the situation, I believe Patrick was simply a mentally ill stalker who followed me and possibly other girls around. But even now, something doesn't feel right. It's been years, and I still feel uneasy when I'm alone, as if someone is watching me. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear footsteps outside my window, but no one is there when I look. I can't help but wonder, was Patrick just a disturbed child? Or did he genuinely have something darker within him? I'll never know. But if you hear his name 3 times, be cautious. You could summon him yourself.